Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Casey Berthel. I'm a school science teacher, and it is a tremendous honor to be the State Teacher of the Year. I'm here today to tell you that the K-12 education system of Georgia is doing well. I know that's a strong statement to begin with, and it may come as a surprise to some, because much of the conversation about education in Georgia tends to center on the pockets and the areas of places where we're not doing as well. While some of our greatest strengths and our proudest moments go unnoticed, go unmentioned. For instance, in 2016, the average SAT score and average ACT score for Georgia high school graduates topped the national average. Georgia also beat the national average in the proportion of students who were enrolled in advanced placement courses. And not just enrolled, we beat the national average in the proportion of students who scored high enough on those exams to earn college credit. So it at least appears that we're keeping up with the trends in preparing students for college. Not just college, we're also preparing them for careers. Reading national publications like Education Weekly, Georgia is consistently recognized for our attention and priority on CTAE education. That's career, technical, and agricultural education, where courses in middle school and in high school zone in on real workforce skills. In fact, other states are patterning their CTAE programs after ours. Even our youngest students are getting attention. Georgia is consistently recognized as being a national leader for our attention to pre-K education and early learning opportunities. We're doing a really great job at that. Last year, we experienced growth, significant improvements in 25 out of 32 subjects tested in the Georgia Milestones testing period. But most of this goes unreported. I could go on and on, but if we couple those things with the experiences I've had traveling around and observing classes all across the state, from Valdosta to Rome, from Athens to Columbus, I've had the chance to see that the great many of Georgia's teachers are doing an impressive job of providing a quality education, especially with the tools and the resources and the clientele that we have. I'm personally confident in the direction that we're headed. I just wish more people knew about the good things that are happening. Now let me pause there and say that we're not perfect. Even in the areas that we are excelling, there's great room for us to get even better. And then there are some areas like elementary literacy or middle school math that are urgent and need our attention. What to do about the shortage of teachers, especially in critical areas like science and math. We have to do something to fix these things. And then the loudest question right now is, how do we help those schools that are chronically failing or underperforming? I, for one, think that we can be honest about admitting that some of our teachers and some of our schools need help without pointing the finger or denigrating them. For failing schools, something must be done. See, even one student failing is one too many. I think we can all agree on that. But what should be our approach? Later today, you will hear from me on a panel discussing the Education Reform Committee recommendations with specific details on each one of these issues. But I want to use most of the rest of my time to end with these observations. First, the healthiest schools happen in the healthiest communities. That's important enough to say twice. The healthiest schools occur in the healthiest communities. As we focus on turning around failing schools or on improving all of our schools, of course we have to place attention on classroom practices. What are Georgia's educators doing and how can we do it better? We need to seriously invest effort in recruiting the brightest people to become teachers, or about preparing and nurturing and sustaining the teachers that we have in the system. Push them to become better. But at the same time, I tell you, we had better take a long, hard look at the communities that surround schools. Most of my career has been spent at one of those large, urban, predominantly minority, predominantly low-income schools that faces many of the challenges that those opportunity schools face. And we had a extremely talented staff of teachers at that school. But I'll tell you, most of what we fought against came from the problems, the challenges, the mindsets of the neighborhoods around the school. To help Georgia get better, let's build up all of our communities so that students come to school cared for, provided for, and excited about learning. Let's get kids believing that through education, they can go on and be better than their parents. That should still be a notion for every child everywhere in the state. But I'll tell you, many of the students that entered the school I mentioned didn't bring that with them. They were stuck in the cycle of poverty that you heard about earlier this morning. But they should instead be thinking, if I work hard enough and study hard enough, I can be as successful or more successful than my parents. Certainly that was my story one generation ago. I'm the child of a single-parent mother in an impoverished neighborhood. But it was made very clear to me that learning and knowledge is how you progress. So I need your help, and we need your help, to give the message loud and often that education is still important and school is still the place you go to get it. I'm afraid that that message has gone missing in our society. And then finally, let's foster genuine buy-in and community support at the local and grassroots level for our schools. Let's return to the days where grandmothers would bake cookies and raise money to buy books for the libraries if that's what was needed. Let's get our communities believing in our schools again. See, we've gotten better at evaluating schools. We've gotten better at evaluating teachers, which is helpful because it helps us to know where to set the bar. It exposes our weaknesses and our opportunities to improve. But when we do that without celebrating the areas that we are getting it right, we've created a culture of criticism. And we've created this black cloud that hangs over some schools, that without help, those schools that want to escape the cloud feel like they can't. Let's build up our communities. Let's foster buy-in. Let's get our communities believing in schools again. And if we do that, I promise you, on behalf of all of Georgia's teachers, we won't let you down. I'll take questions at this time. Any questions? I hope you guys will stick around. I know that we're all concerned about the impending snow, but I try not to discuss too many details at this point because we have the upcoming panel that will discuss the Education Reform Commission recommendations on things like teacher retention, teacher compensation, testing and evaluation. So I hope you guys will at least stick around and ask me questions then. This is not going like I anticipated. I was ready for the barrage of questions, and the room is silent. Yes?
I'd love to know a little about your school and what got you interested in science and how you became a teacher.
Okay. Well, when I was in high school, I was good at math and science through hard work, a lot of study. And I was told over and over, because you're good at math, because you're good at science, you should be a doctor, you should be a doctor, you should be a doctor. And I accepted that, and I left high school and went to college and thought I'd be a doctor. And I was good at it. I was getting A's in all my classes and performing well, but I didn't enjoy it. I realized once I got there that I'm doing this to make my mom proud, and it's not really what I want to do. So I switched a couple of times, and one of those times I said, let me teach for a year while I figure out what I should be doing. I was still thinking I was going to be a veterinarian or a pharmacist or something, but let me take a year to teach while I figure this out. And that was the best decision for my whole life. In that 1 year of teaching, I realized that's what I should have been doing the whole time, which gives me a good chance to say this. We need to make teaching such an attractive profession that the best and the brightest people want to be teachers. Whether we're honest enough to admit it or not, smart kids are given the message that you can do something better than teaching. And that's wrong. If we allow that to persist, we're missing the chance to get the best and brightest people leading our classrooms. Let's do whatever it takes to make education an attractive profession. Because I regret that I didn't choose teaching first. I think my experiences as a scientist have made me a better science teacher, but I wish I had started teaching day one. That's how we're going to recruit the teachers that we need to fill the classrooms that we have. Question?
I asked earlier about grading system. You know, our state labels schools A through F, and I'm wondering if you think that's helpful, and if you don't, I mean, what would be the alternative since we do accountability?
You know, one of the great challenges, I'm speaking as a teacher now, when I talk to teachers at the copy machine or at the water fountain, we get these scores, and honestly, we're not exactly certain how these scores are calculated. Whether it's A through F or 0 to 100, we need to do a better job of educating the teachers on what those, and the community, on what those scores mean. As a parent in a neighborhood, when I open the paper and I see that my local school received a 67, along with that should come the information about what that 67 means. Otherwise, it might bring along with it some assumptions that are incorrect. Does this make sense? And let's think about this. Evaluating schools by itself is a new concept. You know, one or two ask yourself this. Did your parents know how the school you attended performed? Probably not. One or two generations ago, you simply went to the school you went to because you lived in that neighborhood. And because of that, the parents were more invested in the school because they knew this is where my kid has to go. And I'm not going to allow failure to even be an option. Now, because we provide this metric and we provide this data to the parents, and everybody has the ability to evaluate every school without really fully knowing how the evaluation is tabulated, it's created this mass confusion, I think, about what these, how can this information be more helpful than creating outcomes that we don't want, like that black cloud I mentioned that hangs over schools. Because even the struggling school I worked at was producing remarkable outcomes for most of the students that were there. And we had that low score, and the teachers worked tirelessly all the time to tell the parents in the neighborhood, that score doesn't really represent what we're doing. Come visit our school or sit in my classroom or talk to the kids about what they're learning. Or look at the kids that I've taught who have gone on now to be dentists or accountants. And then you will know that as a teacher, I'm still doing the best job I can, and I'm doing a good job at it. Am I answering your question?
It sounds like you're saying our scoring system isn't very good.
I'm saying that our scoring system might not be clear. I'm not going to say is it good or not. It's not clear. And as teachers, we're unclear. The community is unclear. Whose fault that is a different question. I'm certain the DOE makes the information available, but teachers are so focused on what we're doing that we don't take the time to look into how the scores are tabulated. We know that CCRPI is a number, and you get some percentage for student performance and some percentage for these different categories, but if I take the time to do that, I won't be able to grade my essays. Does that make sense? I see a question here, and then I've got to turn it over to Mr. Dollinger.
How do you make teaching that attractive profession that you say must be?
It starts with things like this. The way we talk about teaching in the newspaper and on TV and at the drugstore and at the dry cleaner and in line at the grocery store, and reminding everybody the teachers are still doing the best we can, and then celebrating the areas that most people don't know that SAT and ACT scores for Georgia are higher than the nation. Do those types of things, as well as improve teacher compensation to make people want to join this profession. They feel secure that if I do that, I can still pay my bills and meet my responsibilities. That combination of things will improve teacher morale, will improve community buy-in, and that's what's going to make teaching attractive again. Teachers are the types of people who got into this wanting to know that what I'm doing is making a difference. But we're not allowed to hear that very often. We hear in the newspaper all the time that you guys need to get better. You guys need to get better. It's like if I'm on this quest, and then I promise I'll sit down. I'm on this quest this year to lose a few pounds because it's New Year's. Most of you probably are. And I hired this guy who's a trainer, and I see him at 6 o'clock every morning, right? If I work out every day and he keeps reminding me, hey, you got to lose 20 pounds. You got to lose 20 pounds. You got to lose 20 pounds. But he doesn't tell me every once in a while, hey, I notice you're down 2 pounds here. I keep going, I notice you're down 4 pounds here. I'm eventually going to quit. Let's not forget the end goal, but let's not miss the chance to celebrate our incremental successes along the way in a way that will sustain our teacher morale. The same morale you need to go to the gym is the same morale the teachers need to come to the schoolhouse. And that morale comes from celebrating our incremental successes. I'm not asking us to ignore our challenges, but let's balance that message by celebrating our successes along the way. And I have to sit down now. Thank you for this opportunity.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Dollinger, President of the Partnership, and again, welcome to our 13th Annual Media Symposium. We are so lucky in Georgia that this researcher and scientist decided to be a science teacher. We're also lucky at the Partnership that every year that the Teacher of the Year is out of the classroom to be able to do things like this, they sit on our board. So we have that good voice of Casey at our board meeting, and that passionate voice comes out, that messaging all the time. He gave us a good message. He mentioned that some of the better performing schools are in the healthier neighborhoods, and that we should be building up those neighborhoods. And I've said before, it's difficult for a school to outperform its community. So how can we help that community come together? You've heard that message kind of intertwined. Well, Gary McGivney, Deputy Superintendent of DOE, is going to be with us now to talk about how to work on that whole child. And it's kind of focused on number 8, our issue number 8, but it's also kind of laced through number 4, number 9, and some others. It's how to get these kids strong, and those that have some emotional issues, mental health issues, social health issues, are going to struggle through that birth to work pipeline that Dana talked about at the very beginning. So with that, Gary, please come on up.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gary McGivney with the Department of Education. Sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, it's important to state the obvious, and I think this is one of those times when it's important to state the obvious. One is that the top 10 of the issues are interrelated. And I don't want us to forget that. Sometimes we look at the top 10 issues and we look at those issues separately, but it's important to take time to realize that they're interrelated. And the nexus that helps them be interrelated is the fact that they all impact children. Every issue of every year I've ever seen, they always focus on the impact of children, and that too should not be lost, even though it is an obvious statement. Today, as Steve mentioned, we're going to, for a brief period of time, talk about some of the issues that some communities and some parents and even some advocates don't really talk enough about, in my opinion, and that is the overall health of children. And we could talk about a number of health-related issues. We could talk about tooth decay being the number one physical reason why students miss school. We could talk about the 16% of children in Georgia who have enough visual problems that impacts their ability to learn and do well in school. We could talk about the number of students who have hearing problems that go undetected and untreated that impacts their learning. But today we're going to focus this afternoon on mental health. And as you heard earlier from our esteemed Teacher of the Year about the importance of the community, I would ask you to extend your understanding and definition of community to include the service community. They're part of the community. And what I mean by that is the access that children have to services in their community. And that varies widely in the state of Georgia, and we need to address that issue of access. It surprised a lot of people that 1 out of 5 children has a diagnosable mental health disorder. 1 in 10 children has serious mental health problems that are severe enough to impair how they function at home, in school, and in the community. Look at the data of the age. Between 9.5 and 14.2% of birth to 5-year-old children experience significant socio-emotional problems that can ultimately impact school and their ability to adjust to school and interact at school. The onset of major mental illness problems may occur as early as 7 to 11 years of age. Almost 50% of all long-term mental health problems start by the age of 14. 14% of children with mental health problems receive mostly D's and F's on schoolwork. A large number, 44% of children with mental health problems drop out of high school. That's untreated mental health problems. Treated mental health problems, that number is drastically reduced. In the course of the school year, children that have mental health issues miss on an average of between 18 and 22 days of school because of the untreated mental health issue. That doesn't also include the days they are sick, the days they may miss because they have a cold or the flu. You add those to those days and you're talking about them possibly missing a month of school. We did research at the Department of Education and found out, just with looking at 8th graders who missed more than 15 days of school, their graduation rate in the 4-year cohort drops from 82% to 38% based just on attendance. 21% of low-income children aged 6 to 17 have mental health problems, and many times that's related to complex trauma because of their life. In Georgia, this should draw our attention to the fact that 32% of children in military families scored as high risk for mental health problems, which is 2.5 times higher than the national average. And keep in mind, Georgia has at least 30,000 military-connected students. And frankly, that's an underestimate. It's probably closer to 40,000. Because of the mobility, it's difficult to get that data accurately into the longitudinal data system. There's a higher prevalence of mental health problems in children aged 11 to 17 in military families compared to the general population. Up to 80%, and this is not a typo, up to 80% of children in need of mental health services do not receive them. Some refer to that as the 20/20 problem. 20% of children have a mental health disorder, but only 20% of them receive the help they need. Only 45% of adults and young adults, children and young adults, adolescents and young adults hospitalized for a suicide attempt received mental health services in the prior month. Only 29% of children expressing suicide ideation in the prior year received any type of mental health services. And I'll add parenthetically, because I just got the data in, Georgia had 50 suicides last year between the age of 5 and 19. Schools are often the first place where some of these mental health issues first emerge. That's why it's imperative, and you'll hear me talk about this later, of recognizing and training staff how to recognize those issues. Of school children who do receive some type of mental health services, 78% of that is at school. But keep in mind, that is not therapeutic services for the most part. But there is potential to provide therapeutic services. In a survey of school social workers, only 11% of the respondents reported that students on their caseload receive any type of services outside of school. The next part is what we typically don't think about, is linking children's mental health issues with adult mental health outcomes. That was one of the focuses of the recent House Study Committee on Mental Health Initiatives. The genesis of that study committee was really adult mental health issues. But as testimony emerged in the 4 hearings they had, what did they find out? It's linked to untreated children's mental health issues. Children and teenagers, and all this comes from research, and you want the citations, I can give you the citations. Children and teenagers with psychiatric disorders have 6 times higher odds of having health, legal, financial, or social problems as adults. Studies show that mental health problems during childhood that are left untreated make it more likely that the child later will be arrested. And I won't read all these to you. I'll just summarize these 3. And again, these are all from research, and if you want the citations, I can provide those to you. It's basically saying this, ladies and gentlemen: untreated children's mental health issues do not go away. They're carried into adulthood and are manifest in behaviors of adults. and create a lot of problems for our citizens and for services and agencies across the state because they were untreated. Just very quickly, the mental health workforce. Georgia has approximately 1,050 psychiatrists. If you base on a ratio of 2.5 million children ages 0 to 18, that's a ratio of 1 to 2,380. But some psychiatrists do not treat children, and 50% of our psychiatrists are over the age of 55. Georgia has approximately 3,200 psychologists, ratio you see there. Some psychologists do not treat children. School has approximately 3,700 mental health counselors. You see the ratio there. Again, some of them do not treat children. In our schools, you see the ratio of school counselors, 1 to 500. And you say, well, that's 1 to 450 is recommended by the National Association. That's not too far off. You know how many more counselors that would require us to hire to reach that ratio of 1 to 450? 400 more. And look at the ratio of school psychologists compared to the recommended ratio of national organizations. And you go down the list and look at school social workers. That's not a typo. The recommendation of 1 to 250, we're 1 to 2,742. And the school social worker plays a critical role in matching services that children need to the services that are available in the community. Georgia has approximately 1,500 licensed school nurses. That's 700 short of what's needed to meet the state recommendations. We do have some interventions, however. The Georgia Apex Project, which is a project out of the Department of Developmental Disabilities, where they provided extra money at each of the community service boards to provide services, mental health services in the schools in the form of therapists in the schools. It's a model that is working, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to find out more about Apex, you can go to one project that's working very well, a CSB and a private provider in Northwest Georgia. Go to the Georgia Hope website, Georgia HOPE website. Also, we have a federal grant called Project Aware. The focus of that is mental health first aid, training staff to recognize children who may be in distress with mental health issues, whether it's situational or long-term. Because think about it, we operate a lot based on attribution theory. I don't know if you're familiar with attribution. Attribution is whatever we assign the cause to behavior to be determines as much how we react to that as the behavior itself. That pretty much rules how we interact with other people. We react more to why we think they did what they did than what they actually did. So think about a teacher who's not aware of what mental illness looks like or what mental health issues looks like, and they see the behavior that's disruptive. Yet they go through the training and they now understand that this is symptomatic behavior instead of defiant behavior. So then what do you think the consequence is? It's the difference between a referral to the discipline office and a referral to the counseling office. In Project Aware, we have over 1,000 that have been trained in mental health first aid, which means they now understand what it looks like to have a child that has mental health issues and distress. We're also focusing on school climate because we know what the research says. All children benefit from a safe and secure and welcoming climate, but children who have mental health issues benefit from it even more. In fact, they depend on it. The research finds that positive school climate, and you can read all that, reduces student discipline problems, out of school suspensions, etc. We have the research on that if you want the references for that as well. We have found, after we did a lot of research around the nation, that PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Supports, is the most research-based framework for improving school climate. So we have encouraged schools to implement PBIS. We're now up to 800 schools around the state at different levels of implementing PBIS. As you can see in comparing the school climate rating, as you know, every school in Georgia has a school climate rating now of 1 to 5. We found there's a correlation between the school climate rating and scores on the CCRPI. The data that will be coming out later this month on the recent school climate ratings shows a larger difference. Now it's a 32-point difference between a school climate rating of 5 and a school climate rating of 1 on the CCRPI. School climate matters. School climate matters. The business community figured this out a long time ago. Some of the places you shop and frequent, you go there primarily because of the climate. You go by a lot of shops and stores and restaurants to get to the place that you feel the most comfortable because of the climate. Our schools should be no different. We also found out, and we tell schools all the time, improving school climate is just the beginning. That's not the end, ladies and gentlemen. That's just the beginning. When you improve the climate for the school then is ready to do other things. One of the next steps is improve classroom climate. One of the next steps is to improve the social-emotional interaction between teachers and students. There's a dynamic, there's a skill, there's a give and take between that communication between a teacher and a student. It's a very fragile, and it can be a very beautiful interaction, but it's a necessary interaction, and it does not necessarily come naturally. It can be learned. None of these work independently. We work very hard to link PBIS, Project Aware, and Project Apex to benefit children. But also, we're looking at what we're doing from hopefully a larger scope, ladies and gentlemen. We're going outside the field of education and asking other experts to help us with this. For example, the epidemiologists are helping us look at data in a different way. And through the epidemiology view, we have discovered that early language nutrition has a real impact on education of students in our school. Children and adults who have mental health issues are significantly more likely to have limited reading proficiency. Which caused which? We don't know, but we need to find out more about that. A national representative sample showed that up to 75% of children with mental health issues have limited literacy skills. But what we have found out, ladies and gentlemen, if you look deep into that data, a lot of that is tied to the lack of early language development. And with children, if they don't have adequate language to express themselves, what becomes their language? Their behavior becomes their language. We all will express ourselves one way or the other because we're human beings. If you don't have the language, you will express yourself in other ways. And a lot of kids is through overt behavior. Recommendations. The first recommendation is for Georgia to have a comprehensive children's mental health strategic plan. There is no way in the world that the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities can do this by themselves. That's just impossible. It's too large of a problem. It's too large of an issue. It has too many moving parts. It has too many requirements for one agency to do this. They cannot, they've been given an impossible task. They need help. We all need to do that. And one mechanism, because I've been asked, well, how do we do that? Arguably the most effective legislation in the last 20 years in Georgia was the Georgia Criminal Justice Reform Council. Some have considered it a model for the nation. Why not use that same model and create a Children's Mental Health Reform Council to bring all the resources together, to be a problem-solving body, not a body that competes for resources, but a body that solves problems. And what will be some of the things they consider? And this is, of course, not all-inclusive because it would be based on the recommendations of the council. Have an advisory committee within the council that makes recommendations on an annual basis. Instead of having these different specialties competing for resources from the legislature, have a combined workforce service plan. Offer incentives for those that we need to have in the state. For example, psychiatrists, loan forgiveness programs for psychiatrists, the community psychiatric programs. There are models for this around the nation that we could look at. Add more psychiatric training in medical school rotations, expand mental health training for pediatric primary care. The number one recommendation, the number one request from pediatricians for training is in children's mental health. Expand mental health training and consultation of pediatric primary care physicians. There are examples around the nation of how to do that. There's one there in District of Columbia. And how about this? This is a radical idea. Why don't we support what works? we have the data to show that Project Aware works, that it's effective, but it's a grant. It has an end date. Georgia needs to embrace what works and come up with a sustainability plan for those things that work. So 5 years from now, we don't look back and say, whatever happened to Project Aware? You know, that really was effective. I wonder why that went away. The same with Georgia Apex. We have the data to show that it's very effective. Why not include that in a state sustainability plan? Why not commit to those strategies that we know work? Broaden access to health care. There's ways to do that through consultation. Also, there's ways to do that by working with the case management organizations, including Medicaid. Develop a clearinghouse of research of best practices. We know that PBIS works to improve school climate, what helps all children. Expand language nutrition awareness and training to parents, to nurses, to everyone who interacts with children when they're born, before they even get to school. Help them develop those language skills are key to them learning to read. Create grants to expand social-emotional learning, expand and augment substance use and abuse training. Some of you may remember the old Title IV. At one time, Georgia received millions of dollars for drug abuse training for our schools. That went away. We received no federal money for that like we used to. Develop partnerships of facilities for cross-functional training. And lastly, increase public awareness of mental health. If you look at the report that just came out this week, as a matter of fact, from the House Study Committee on Mental Health Initiatives, and there's a copy in the back room. Let me read the first recommendation. Creation of the Georgia Children's Mental Health Reform Council, modeled after the Criminal Justice Reform Council. The committee recommends that a Children's Mental Health Reform Council be created in order to develop a state strategic plan to provide comprehensive, accessible, and coordinated mental health prevention, early and timely interventions, and appropriate treatment services, specifically to meet the needs of Georgia's children and to reduce and further prevent the growing number of adults with untreated mental illness.
Which committee was that, Dr.?
The House of Representatives Study Committee on Mental Health Initiative, Reform, Public Health, and Safety. I'll take questions. If you need the references for the research I mentioned, just go through Dana, and because she has all those references. And thank you very much.
Some of you may have been with us last year at one of our forums when we addressed this topic. And you know, at the partnership, we like to always get to the so what. What can we do about this? And then we have some of that in our top 10 issues every year. But even in a large forum of 150 people, we had a little bit of a call out, a shout out, to do just what Gary's reviewing, is to have the governor convene something similar to juvenile justice so that we can really get our arms around this issue. You mentioned that report's on the back table, so if you want that, pick one up on your way out. We realize that you've heard the theme today that turn around these low-performing schools is a complicated process. And you heard from DOE that congruence piece is really important for them. But it's even more than the congruence. It's helping to focus on the child's social and emotional well-being. So we at the partnership keep getting requests to do more in this arena. It really has not been our core competency in the past. It's been more education. Of course, education is a whole birth to work pipeline for us. But we realize that now we too have learned that this is so integral to helping improve that birth to work pipeline that we've got to do something more on this. We've done forums. We've raised that up as one of our top 10 because we feel very strong we've got to put more of a spotlight on this issue of child well-being. So if our panel members can come up, we will get you into the final stretch. Our panel is going to be about looking at public education in Georgia and what's ahead. Again, you've got the bios in your packet. We want to have several voices on our panel as we peek into what 2017 might have in store for us. Dana's going to lead us through that conversation. Dr. Norris Price was not able to be here today because of the storms. She would have brought a superintendent's voice and someone who had been on the Education Reform Commission. But Casey Bethel, you've already heard from our Teacher of the Year, he was on that commission. And Senator Lindsay Tippins, Chair of the Senate Education Committee, well versed in this. And Martha Ann Todd, if you've read her bio, she's done it all. School-based, district-based, state-based, and university-based leadership, and now with the governor's office. So with that, let's get into our panel and our final round of questions from you folks. And Dana, it's yours.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome to our last session of today. And again, thank you for sticking with us with the threat of doom that we all feel hanging over us, according to the news. I'm not going to say very much as facilitator because I think you all want to hear from our experts. And so what I want to do is open it up and just sort of go down the line. And would each of you take about 2 minutes just to kind of sum up where you see us going as we go into 2017 and what you think are going to be the big issues that we're going to see. The question I get all the time is, what's going to happen in 2017? And I shake my magic 8-ball and I go, oh, check again later. And so now I'm checking again later. And Martha Ann, I'd like to start with you and we'll just come down the line.
So my crystal ball says check again later. Seriously, if you're asking me from the governor's office perspective, I think we'll hear from the governor in the next couple of weeks what his priorities are and what the next steps would be. But in thinking about what I think would be priorities just for the state in general, there are 4 things on my list, and I would say the first one would be the focus on the youngest learners in the state. It's clear that we have a great need in our elementary schools to improve instruction and learning in reading, language arts, and math particularly, not to the detriment of other subjects, but those seem to be foundational issues and areas that we need to focus in on. And also focusing on that earliest age allows us to sort of cut off the flow in that pipeline of students moving up through grade levels that might not be as well prepared as we want to see them be by the time they get to some of the upper grades and some of the classes that Casey's teaching and some of the other courses. I said already that one of the focuses in those grades needs to be very much so on language and literacy development, learning to read. But I do think starting when the children come to school is too late to start. And so we really need to gear up and support and expand any initiatives that we can that are going to be successful in addressing developing language, as Dr. McGibbony mentioned and highlighted already, from birth all the way up to starting to school and through 3rd grade, 5th grade. If we don't talk to our children when they're young, they don't learn language as they should, and we need to start developing the skills and abilities that parents and care providers and others in our communities have to do that and develop programs that will support that as well. The third thing on my list has really already been mentioned by Casey as I came in a while ago, teacher recognition, teacher pats on the back, recruitment, as well as retention of those that we have already in our school systems. There's no doubt in my mind or in anybody's mind down around where I work that teachers are in their classrooms every day trying to do the very best job that they can to make the greatest difference in the life of children that they possibly can. That's why teachers go into teaching, is to change lives. And so we really need to recognize those efforts, but also provide supports to help them and high expectations and supports that will help them meet those expectations. And then the last thing I would say would be leadership development, particularly for our high needs schools. You saw the release from our office yesterday, had more schools on that chronically failing schools list. And schools are doing good things, but they're also struggling in areas, and one of the things that we know from the work we've done over the past few years in just data analysis and working hand in hand with schools in some of the programs that come out of our office is to help develop the capacity of leaders in those buildings and help develop strong leaders to go into schools when new leaders are needed as well. So those would be the things on my list.
Senator Tippins, what?
Well, you're going to think I stole Martha Ann's notes when I addressed the things that I see on the horizon. For quite some time, people have asked me, what do you anticipate in education legislation? And certainly we'll be awaiting the specifics that roll out in the governor's state of the state next Wednesday. But personally, I have two things I'd like to see us address this year. The first would be in our career and technical schools or courses, specifically in CTAE as it's delivered today in different formats. I would like to see an external credentialing program put in place that is verified by industry and concentrate primarily on those areas of the high demand career initiative, the areas that we have a lack of job applicants filling the current jobs. And I believe to add value to education, this is mastery of skills, not only academic exposure. And I believe this is critical in having a seamless job pool of employees going into industry in the state. I do think that as we look at struggling students throughout the state, it's firmly my belief that the majority of teachers in the state of Georgia want to do the best that they know how to do with the resources that they have. I think most of the issues that we face today are in leadership, and probably in leadership in local schools and in districts. It's not so much many times people that don't want to do a good job in leadership. But I think if you look at the struggling schools, however we determine to characterize them, either failing schools, low performing schools, or high percentage of students who are in these schools, you can look at common characteristics of most of these schools. I think we need specific training in leadership. I'm a very strong proponent. I think we need to develop a program of a special forces teams and individualized particular training to go in to these challenging schools. Not all of them are going to be failing for the same reason, but I think you will see a lot of common denominators as you evaluate them. Certainly there may be a difference between urban and rural schools, but typically you see these schools have low socioeconomics, which leads to transiency issues. You see quite often you see an unstable community around the school, unstable communities in the homes, and I believe that causes some of the problems that we face. And to do that, I think we have to have special training to be able to address these problems. And I'm excited about the future that we have an opportunity to address these.
There you go. I think they should hear you.
That's pretty much it, but I do think the governor is wise in addressing and putting an emphasis on education in the elementary school, making a special target for improving elementary school, because I think if you look, as Martha Ann has said, in the critical areas of reading, language arts, mathematics, that's the foundation of all the learning that we have in subsequent grades, and you have to have that foundation. The beauty part about addressing that on a statewide level, certainly it's going to help us in the failing schools or low performing schools, but in every school we have students that are failing are not performing where they should be, and I think having a delivery model that is nimble enough to address the individual needs of all students, and I think that's where we're going to have to go across the state regardless of the school that they're in. Ideally, if we could look at our students and have an individualized education plan or an IEP that most of us associate with special needs students, if we had that for each student and we were providing the education they individually needed, I think our net return on education as a whole would be much greater in the state of Georgia.
First, I want to say I was very, very honored to be included on what was called the Governor's Teacher Advisory Committee around the Education Reform Commission's recommendations. And I think we need even more of that. Very often, when policy decisions are made about education, the teacher voice goes unrepresented. So that we were invited to give feedback was very important and very noteworthy. There were 90 of us from across the state of all different backgrounds, elementary, middle, high, core subjects, elective subjects, pre-K, all types. Charter schools even were represented, and the room was filled with very, very robust conversation. I met with the Metro group, there was a South Georgia group, there was a North Georgia group, and all the reports were that in each room the conversation was very, very robust. And for teachers, I think, I hear that they were very similar. Almost all the rooms said the same things. Certainly in my room, the conversation centered around a few issues that teachers thought, out of all the recommendations, a few issues teachers saw as greater priorities. Most of the teachers arrived wanting to talk about teacher compensation, so that was an important conversation for us. Teacher recruitment and retention. A lot of us veteran teachers who are committed to the career, we recognize that the teacher next door to me has changed every year for the last 3 years, and something has to be done about that. And then teachers really wanted to talk about educator morale, building up the morale of schools, and you heard me talk about community buy-in and the way school is talked about, and how can we as educators, how can we as a system improve that, because that's one of the quickest ways to turn around schools that need help, get everybody believing in the schools. So those were the issues that teachers wanted to talk about. Under morale, there were things like protecting teachers' planning times, being better prepared coming out of the teacher preparation programs, a full year of student teaching as opposed to one semester student teaching, those types of things. So the conversation was really robust amongst the teachers in the room, and we're proud to have given our feedback. We wait to see what's going to come out of it.
I just have one sort of general question for any or all of you to answer, and then I want to turn it over to the people who really want to ask the questions. You know, over the last year or 2 years, especially over the last year, under Georgia Department of Education, we've been leading this redesign of the state plan under ESSA. And so they're looking at questions like, what does our accountability system look like? How do we define failing schools? What do we want from our schools? And we're trying to come up with a plan to answer those questions. At the same time, we've been working very hard on the Education Reform Commission recommendations, all of which you guys were intimately involved with. And so my question is, do you see these two tracks sort of coming together in some way? And how are those going to move us into 2017? What do you think is going to happen with those issues?
I think we have a rare opportunity to reprioritize maybe some of our efforts in education. I will say I think it would probably be wise to maybe push pause for a couple of months anyway to see if we can get a feel for and see if there's going to be any specific redirection from the new administration. I think we'll have a new Secretary of Education, but I still think the major focus that we have is on student achievement. I believe that's always a local issue handled one-on-one between the teacher and the student. So certainly the framework and the mechanization, or the mechanism and the organizations will all be moving together, but I think we make a mistake when we take our eye off the ball that the primary goal we have is student achievement, and whatever we can do each day consistently to guarantee student achievement, good teaching for each student.
I was also had the honor and the great privilege to be on the teacher advisory committee for the state's ESSA plan, representing the teacher voice. And what stood out to me was that although the Education Reform Commission's recommendations and the ESSA plan might address them similarly or dissimilarly, differently, they both have pinpointed some of the same topics, some of the same issues, and that's been reaffirming for me. Things like, how do we better prepare teachers for their first day in the classroom? How do we better recruit and retain teachers? Things like that come up in ESSA, but also in the Education Reform Commission. So I hope that these two things might come together, but like I said, we'll wait and see.
When you talk about ESSA, from my perspective, we're engaged heavily in accountability piece of that work. And so I would say that maybe I'm in the minority, but I see accountability as telling us how we're doing. So when we think about the CCRPI and we think about the school grades reports, those should be focused on the student outcomes. Achievement, student achievement, but student progress toward achieving at the levels that they should. And certain key indicators like preparation for success in post-secondary enrollment, attainment of additional credits in high school times toward post-secondary credits, graduation rate. Those things to us are key in terms of accountability metrics. I think our current system could use some streamlining, and that's been part of the work of the ESSA committees. The ESSA plan that the Department of Education has to submit to the federal government is much larger, though, than just accountability, and should include, in my mind, accountability doesn't tell you. So the index, the measures that are reported don't tell you what to do. They should just be a clear gauge of how you're doing on the most important outcomes. The rest of the ESSA plan, though, really is going to lay out the blueprint, I think, for the things that the department sees as most important, and hopefully those things are aligned with what everybody in the state sees as most important ways to approach accomplishing those outcomes. Key things that we've already been talking about today, even though I haven't been here the whole time. I know some of those things have been mentioned that are mentioned in the report that you have published today, and that have been discussed in all of the committees that have been working. So I think you'll see a lot of alignment there.
Since accountability has been brought up a few times, speaking on behalf of all teachers, not all teachers, but very many teachers, I want to say that there are two great challenges when teachers hear talk of accountability. For one, what teachers do involves or produces outcomes for so much more than just test scores and student achievement. Teachers do things like contribute to the social and emotional well-being of our students, career exposure and counseling and guidance, even from teachers, not just the school counselor. And this isn't new. This has always been the case. If you think back to the one teacher who impacted your life the most, you probably remember something they invested in you beyond the content that they taught. You remember Ms. Smith for what she said, not just the math that she said. But the way we evaluate teachers doesn't give enough credit to those things. So teachers say all the time, hey, we understand, all of us are in it to make sure students are intelligent and they're academically prepared. But we also want to be recognized and given credit for, in our evaluations, the very many other things we do. So that's one challenge when we talk about accountability. And then the other thing is, now that we've gotten the weight of test scores down to a more acceptable level, most teachers are comfortable with the teacher keys evaluation system, the TEAK system that we use to evaluate teachers, except that there's this topic that's called interrelated reliability. It's subjective in the way that it depends on which administrator is evaluating me. I could have one assistant principal evaluate me this year and receive the highest scores of 4, and I could do all the exact same things next year and be evaluated by a different administrator with the exact same practices. I haven't changed anything and receive a 2. This is the subjective nature of the teacher keys evaluation system that teachers are leery of, and we need to be more consistent in the way that we apply it.
With that, I would like to turn it over to the room and take any questions from the reporters that we have, and I'll be repeating your question so that we can get it for the audio.
Senator Tippins, Ms. Suggs this morning directed my question toward you, so you're in the hot seat now. About the Education Reform Commission's proposed funding formula, what are the chances of it being enacted this legislative session?
So the question was directed at Senator Tippins about the chances that it will move forward with the funding reform.
Well, according to this morning's Atlanta Journal, I think the governor has said that he's probably not going to recommend a change in the funding formula this year, that he's going to look at addressing the schools that are low performing, and I believe that's a very wise decision to make. I think an initiative like that probably needs to come from the governor's office. I think if it comes from the legislature, or ideally, if you want to change a funding formula, I think there needs to be a whole lot of work on the front end of it. and talk about the different ramifications if that's going to happen. And I know when people say, well, QBE is outdated, we need a student-based funding formula. I think personally QBE is a student-based funding formula because the monies are allocated in the different areas of instruction, and there's somewhat of a tie between the weighting in that and the cost of delivery of the education for specific children. But I do think, as was the case in QBE in the drafting back in the 80s, that was a 2-year project. I don't think we need to undertake an issue like redraft or recreating a new funding formula. I think it probably needs to be at least a 2-year period. I think there needs to be just a tremendous amount of interaction with all involved parties. I think it's easier to deal with the problems before you enact the legislation than it is to come back and say, my goodness, what have we done? And so I think it's wise not to address that. It's my sense of what I have read that it's probably not going to be in the recommendation. And so that's pretty much it.
For Senator Tippins also, do you have an idea at this point whether or not the Senate will be involved in, or your committee in the Senate will be involved in helping draft whatever legislation sort of replaces OSD this year?
The question again for Senator Tippins is, will the Senate and the Senate Ed Committee be involved in any drafting of legislation about whatever happens post-OSD?
I honestly believe there'll probably be more involvement this year than there has been since I've been in the Senate, because people realize how critical it is. I think if you have one perspective that's drafted in a piece of legislation, that legislation is dropped, say it comes from the governor's office, then it goes to the House, they have their perspective, and then it goes to the Senate, and they have their perspective, and if they can't agree, then it goes back to maybe a conference committee. It makes more sense for all the parties to sit down and talk about, from their standpoint, what the non-negotiables are and what the overall goals are to be undertaken in the drafting of the legislation. And I think there's less contention and there's much more profitable use of the time. We don't have but 40 days, and that sounds like a long time until you get started and you blink your eyes and it's gone. And so to actually come up with a more workable and a more broadly accepted piece of legislation, it's much easier to get it right to start with rather than go back and try to recraft it 3 or 4 different times.
Also for Senator Tippins, you said, we're talking about failing schools or struggling schools, whatever you want to call them. You said you think we need to develop something like maybe special forces teams to go in and help those schools. Can you elaborate on that idea, on that concept?
Senator Tippins, continuing on the hot seat, can you elaborate on your special forces comment?
Well, I think in typical leadership training, I'm not sure there is the type of emphasis that should be given to intervention to really be a transformational leader in some of these high-need schools. These situations are sometimes in grave circumstances when you look at the society and the community around the schools. And I'm not sure that our colleges in their leadership degrees address this. And I think it makes much more sense to have people who have been successful as transformational leaders in school across the United States. I mean, if I got my wishes, we would set up an academy and have those people who have been successful in turnaround transformational schools come in as adjunct professors and talk about the actual circumstances that they face, their strategies, talk about the different challenges, and give a broad perspective on this. I think critical to this is going to be to teach the transformational leaders how to go in and evaluate a school, actually make a determination of what the causes of failure are and maybe what the best suggested protocol would be to address it and bring it along. I think in these schools, most of the people that have been successful in transformational leadership have been those who have gone in and engaged the community. And that's tough. You can't do that in 40 hours a week. I'm not sure you're going to do it in 60 hours a week. But I think that if you have a special forces team, you realize the stakes are high. It's rigorous work. It's tough work. And I think they ought to be, if you have people that are truly successful in this and can transform a school, it's worth some extra money to pay these people. Because if you look at the alternative, if you look at what we're losing in the potential and the investment of our education dollars, I think it's the best money we can spend. If you started an institute like this, it's going to take some money to do it. But I think you also, is critical to this, I'm not sure everyone comes with the DNA that they're transformational leaders. I think you have to be able to assess a grit factor in people. I think you have to, you've got to be fair, you've got to be tough, but you've got to understand people. These are all people that you're working with. And sometimes you have to look people in the eye and say, these are the areas you absolutely have got to do better in. But I think that's part of being a good leader, is leading other people through tough situations. And every one of these schools, regardless of how many there are on the list, each one of them are in tough situations. And these kids in these schools, we don't have them but 13 years, and some of them we don't have but 12 years. But in doing that, we're going to have to devise a system that if a child doesn't even come till the first grade, and if they have a 600-word vocabulary, we've got to have a delivery system. We can take those children and build the foundation that a robust education can be built on. A lot of people say, well, Tippins, you're ignoring the fact that we need science and social studies. No, I'm not ignoring that, but I'll promise you this. If you have a student that's proficient in mathematics, if you have a student coming out of elementary school that's proficient in language arts and reading, they will be proficient in these other areas. If you go and look at the root causes of failure in terms of overall academic failure and the graduation rate, go back and look at what caused that. I'll guarantee you it's a foundational deficiency. We've got to get back to that. That's not very glamorous. It's not very sexy. People talk about, well, we really need to teach them critical thinking skills. I don't care what kind of buzzword you get. When you get back down to it, we've got to get back to the basics of blocking and tackling, of basic foundational education. If we get that right, by the time they come out of elementary school, I'll promise you we'll be much more successful. And I'll bet anybody, if we can successfully put this in place, you'll cut your graduation half by way north of 50%.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the importance of leadership and then mentoring others and find bright spots of people who are doing it right. One of our issues this year, as you heard me talking earlier, is leadership. And we have some examples in there. We have resources in Georgia. We have the GLISI, the Georgia Leadership Institute for School Improvement, that goes and works with these districts. Clearly, Gwinnett County, a very well-resourced district, has their own leadership development, but we also highlight more unlikely suspects like Dr. Mike Duncan in Pike County, down in Pike County, doing amazing work down there. And so we can have him paired with another like district to help them turn around. That there are bright spots that we can highlight in Georgia, but we need to figure out how to take these things to scale and make them more common.
I promise to be quick. Yeah, the story about Pike County is in the top 10, a notch to the top 10. I have not met him, but his story jumped off the page to me as being one of those transformational leaders like Senator Tippins is talking about. But when you read the story, how did he do it? The two things stand out. He engaged all the stakeholders. He engaged all of the community about identifying the challenges first, and then fostering buy-in and how they're going to go about changing it. And then secondly, somebody came up with the term incrementalism in the idea that he focused on, are we better this year than we were last year? Are we better today than we were yesterday? As we talk about the failing schools and these opportunity schools, what we don't talk about is that many of these schools have been failing for a long time. It took a long time for them to get where they are, so it's quite possible that turning them around will take a long time. Do we have the long vision, the commitment, the sustainability to go in and do it slowly so that we get it right? And I think that's the story that jumps out about Pike County.
And so I'll just add two comments to that. That is a great statement about why it's so important to maintain a focus on progress and student growth, not just student achievement. So when we talk about student outcomes, we're not just talking about their achievement compared to a certain milestone for a particular grade, but we're talking about the progress that they're making toward what we want that ultimate outcome to be. I think that's critical. So just want to highlight that.
You all mentioned a few things that you thought schools in the state maybe should do in the coming year. Are there some things that maybe we should stop doing or we could drop so that money and time can be diverted to the things, other things?
Question is, are there things that we are doing currently that we should stop doing so we could redirect those resources to more things we should be doing?
So I'd like to start, and I'm going to echo again something that Casey just said, and I don't really want to point out anything to stop doing, except stop changing so quickly. The commitment to choosing a path forward, choosing something that you think will make a difference in student outcomes, and then sticking with it long enough to see if you're really able to make a difference, I think is a lesson that we really need to learn in education. We're very quick to take the next new thing when something doesn't go exactly right or exactly the way we want it to in our first couple of attempts at solving a problem. So I would say choose a path, stick to it for the long term, and make sure you look for those incremental improvements and growth over time.
I do think we need some feedback from the people in the field that are actually having to deal with either rules and regulations that were set at a bureaucratic level or legislation that was passed in the legislature, quite often by legislators who've not been in up close and personal in a public school for 30 years. But I think if you do an in-depth evaluation, give people the opportunity to make suggestions, I don't think anyone is better suited to solve problems than those that are intimately involved in the process on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure there are things that we require people to do that are very, very time-consuming, and I question sometimes the real benefit that we get from the investment of that time. I think sometimes that our assessments, we give different assessments. I'm not sure that we could not roll into a single assessment the need for data that we can gather in that. I think if we can be creative in that, I think we free up days and hours for instruction. And quite often it's easy to legislatively say, for a legislator to say, I think we ought to have 3 hours of this or a week of this, and this needs to be a special emphasis. I think we have got to be able to capitalize on the time we already have. We have 180 days, but if you look at how many days that are lost by procedural exercises or compliance exercises, I think we can receive some feedback and say, what about if you do it differently? I can tell you in my industry that I'm involved in, some of the best suggestions that I get are from people that are having to do the job day by day.
Do teachers have a similar view?
Similar. Yeah, I echo all their statements.
Ty?
I have a softball, non-controversial question. Our president-elect's only remaining stated education policy would be the creation of a national voucher program using federal and state dollars. What's the appetite for that in Georgia, and would it be a good thing for public education?
Ty's question to the panel, the only publicly stated platform that President-elect Trump had around education was a national voucher program, state and federal dollars. Can you speak to the appetite for that in Georgia, and would it be a good thing for us, or how do you see that playing out?
My primary concern in a voucher program is quite often, if you offer vouchers, the only students that are able to take advantage of those vouchers are the students who have advocates or people that care about those students. If you look at chronically failing schools, quite often there is not that advocacy, there is not that support base for those students. And while it sounds good to say, we're going to put wheels on these dollars and these students can take it everywhere, anywhere they want to, we're going to let them escape from failing schools, I really don't think that that's a solution except for those people who have the wherewithal to take advantage of the vouchers. it's much more critical in my mind to go to the root causes of why schools are failing. It's going to be harder work. We can feel good about it if we give somebody a ticket out and say, okay, you can escape a failing school. We have not solved the problem with those children that are going to be left in a failing school. A voucher is not going to do them any good. You could give every kid in the school an offer of a voucher. But if there are no alternatives, and if there's no other place they can go that's logistically possible, we may feel good about it, but I'm not sure we've solved the problem.
I have no idea what it would look like in Georgia, but I'm afraid of vouchers and school choice. They're not synonymous, but I'll use them together for two reasons. For one, it fosters the impression that a better education can be gotten elsewhere. And it's always this consistent idea that I can move elsewhere. I can go there, I can go there, I can go there and get a better product. Where if I don't change myself, if the parenting for that child doesn't change, and if the support of that child doesn't change, and if the mindset of that child and where they come from isn't changed, will you really get a different outcome? I tend to think not so. And then additionally, it will further drain the struggling schools. Because like Senator Tippin said, which is absolutely right, most of the people who take advantage of choice are the people who have engaged parents and involved parents and the ability to do so, the ride to a school choice, a school of choice, transportation or whatever, and what's going to be left are the kids that have no other choice but to be there, but they've been drained of resources, they've been drained of the top talent. You start to concentrate the lowest talent in one place. If all the smartest kids have gone across town, then the lowest talent kids end all up in the class together with no examples of what achievement looks like. We will further drain the system. It'll produce negative outcomes, I think. That's my opinion.
I will not speak to vouchers specifically, but just talking about parents' options in general. I would say that the governor's well on record, and I agree with him strongly here. Parents should have options for their students. That could be an option for a different public school, and it may have nothing to do with a school being successful or failing. It may be that the school is simply not a good fit for that student's learning style. There are a number of systems in the state that have begun to give their parents options to enroll their students in any school in that public school system that they think would best fit the needs of that child. I think those are things that we need to think about in terms of moving in any way possible away from the fact that where you live determines exactly where you must go to school, and that we need to get more toward the idea of every child learns differently, perhaps in a different way, on a different path, or perhaps there is an environment, a climate, a teaching and learning style that is more suitable to that child in another school. And parents, in my opinion, and I've worked with lots of parents in very high socioeconomic communities and in very low, poor and rural socioeconomic communities, there are some parents who really don't care about their children. That is true. And nobody in our state or any other state can deny that. But for the most part, most parents want the best that they can possibly provide for their child. They might not be able to say what is the best for children in general, but they all have the welfare, or most of them have the welfare of their own children at heart. And so they may not have access, and that's an issue in Georgia definitely for transportation. That's something that has to be taken into account, and perhaps we can look at some of these systems that have been able to make wide choices available within their public schools to parents so they can choose the school that best fits their child. It's not a simple issue. It's a very complicated issue, but just because it is complicated and could have some potentially unintended negative consequences, I don't think it's one that we should shy away from looking at or talking about, because it also has some potentially positive and very, very beneficial outcomes if done in the right way for students in Georgia.
Mr. Bethel talked about challenges with accountability, and school districts in my area have told me the same thing. They say we are more than just a number, these scores don't show everything that we do, and they even talk about how some factors beyond their control affect these scores. So for any of you, do you think, are there solutions to those problems, or is this something that's always going to be a byproduct of educational accountability?
a question around the accountability system and how do we measure all of these factors?
I'm going to go back to what I said earlier about the accountability system. In my view, in my opinion, accountability should be about outcomes. That does not determine, in my opinion, in any way what your inputs should be, what strategies you choose, or what you do to achieve the outcomes that you want. But I will say that the inputs, the strategies, what's done, needs to be done to achieve the outcomes that we want will vary from community to community and school to school because the needs are different. But it is incumbent upon us to help provide supports and training for all the things we've already talked about, for teachers, for focusing on those elementary schools, for working with leaders and preparing leaders to help them be able to determine what strategies and what actions would best meet the needs in their school and in their community. It won't be the same in every community. That doesn't mean, in my opinion, that you are going to report on every action or that you're going to try to figure out a way to measure how much teachers care about their children. I think we would all agree that teachers do care about the children that they teach every day. We just need to find a way to help people do what is most needed in their school and in their community to achieve the outcomes that we as a state want to be able to achieve statewide.
Ms. Todd, how do I explain to my readers what your office does and how's it different than the DOE?
So the question is for Martha Ann, please explain the difference between the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, GOSA, and the Georgia Department of Education.
Okay. Our agency is the P20 agency. We work with initiatives and data from pre-K all the way through post-secondary. We are not the state education agency recognized by the federal government, but we are a governor's agency attached to the governor's office that provides a lot of policy support. We house the P20 data system that is a research-oriented data system and provides support to all of the education agencies, DeCal, Early Care and Learning, all the way up through the university system and technical college system of Georgia. We provide a lot of policy support to the governor's office, to legislators, and to others in the state that ask us for information and research to help support that work. And we also house and support and manage a number of innovative programs and grant-making programs to help schools identify some of those strategies and put into place some of those actions that will help them be more successful in their particular situations.
So piggybacking on that a little bit, does your office have any suggestions or recommendations as the governor sort of looks to figure out how to help these struggling schools? Do you have priorities?
Does the GOSA office have any priorities or recommendations for the governor about how to support these struggling schools moving forward?
Well, the governor doesn't need me to tell him what to think, so we will hear from him what his choices are in the next couple of weeks. But I will go back to the list that I started off with, really. Those have been our priorities in the innovative programs work for a while. We've been focused on early language development, early literacy, really working in elementary schools, try to help those that are struggling most improve as much as possible. We have offered grants and supported in ways that we can find to be effective leader development and teacher preparation support in high-needs schools, and really have begun to focus on that birth to 3 age group that have been ignored sometimes by education agencies. I don't mean really ignored, but really try to find ways from a state perspective to provide some support there as well. So we will continue that work, and those are things that we see as important.
I took the chance last night to peruse the newest list of those opportunity schools, and it was alarming to me that a large proportion of those schools were elementary level schools. Not so many middle, not so many high schools. And the reason why that's so concerning for me is because how often we've heard today that elementary literacy is the greatest predictor of future success. I can really speak as a teacher now on this one. After 3rd grade, if a child can't read, they can't learn almost anything else. Because after 3rd grade, if you can't read, you can't even learn math. After third grade, if you can't read, you can't learn science. After third grade, if you can't read, you can't learn anything. So we need to really, like we said today, place a lot of attention on early literacy, and I'm proud that the Georgia DOE has begun, not begun, but continued and ramped up attention to and emphasis on elementary literacy.
Just one more. Mr. Bethel, if you were over here, not there, what question would you ask anyone in this room that is the most pressing question you think that we need to be asking?
What's the most pressing question that needs to be asked?
That I would ask of you guys, or that I would ask of these guys?
We're not the experts, y'all are. So what needs to be asked? What does the education media in the state need to be asking the policymakers in our state?
The survey that was conducted last year was very helpful. 53,000 teachers responded about what they saw as the greatest challenges to the profession and why they leave. If you haven't had a chance to look at this, I'll point you in that direction. You know, they asked this question. They asked the teachers, they said, how many of you will encourage somebody else to become a teacher? And 67% of practicing teachers said that they won't recommend this profession to someone else. How in the world are we ever going to be able to recruit new teachers if the people who are doing it aren't willing to recommend it? So the question we ought to ask, I hope that you guys will, and you guys have said that you will, now that the teachers have identified their challenges and their issues, follow up with another survey that says, how can we help you make each one of these better? Teachers have said we struggle under the weight of expectation. We struggle under the weight of documentation and activities that are not directly related to teaching, the amount of paperwork. I'm just telling you the things I hear at the water fountain and the copy machine. Why is there so much paperwork? I didn't know this before I got into it, and it stops me from teaching. Now let's ask those same 53,000 teachers for their ideas on how do we help make this better for you.
Where can we get that survey?
Department of Education website, isn't that right, Matt?
Speak to Matt Cardoza.
That's right. Senator Tippins, do you think, for a few years, first time I ever heard the term government school came in the legislature, which I thought was so interesting because it came from elected government officials. But they used it as basically an insult to the public schools, and suddenly everyone was describing public schools in Georgia as government schools, somehow implying that they were sort of run by this faceless group, didn't really care. Are we past that now? Because we're going into a federal mode. We're probably going to hear a lot more about government schools again. But it seemed to me the Senate and the House were moving away from that mindset. What do you think about that?
Well, first time I ever heard government schools was on a talk radio program. And I think you have to realize that by and large, those people are more entertainers sometimes than they are purveyors of fact. And I think the term government school got to be a very incendiary term. I think it made people mad. I went to a government school. I would say most of us in here went to a government school. The fact that the school is a public school, it was one of the first duties that was identified in the United States was a need of government to provide a good education to all people regardless of status. But it troubles me when people talk about government schools because we have government schools in the Atlanta metropolitan area that perform as highly as some of the most prestigious private institutions. The private institutions have some of the same problems because we're dealing with humans and they have human failures, both as students, as parents, and as teachers and administrators. It's not perfect. No system is perfect. But I'll say this, if we did not have government schools, it's been my observation that not many of the boutique school delivery folks want to go in and take a failing government school and say, let me see what I can do with that school, with the same kids in the same building, with the same set of problems. I'd be willing to spot them changing the staff if they want to. But I want to see an honest comparison with people that don't have a pre-qualifying application to come in. Because to have that, you've got to have an advocate that's willing to fill out an application to go to a boutique school. I want to see an honest comparison with somebody taking a school as it is with the same students and see if there is a better model. There may be. We can manage better sometimes than we do today. But the fact of the matter is, if it's a government school, if that's an immediate indictment of failure, I think the entertainers on radio might ought to pick something else to look at, because most of us in here came out of a government school.
Final question? All right, I want to go.
Will you talk a little bit more about outcomes and what do you mean when you say outcome and how do you measure?
A question to Martha Ann about what do you mean when you say outcomes? If you could clarify.
When I talk about outcomes, I'm coming from the perspective of the accountability work. And to me, an outcome is something that is an impact on a student that you can measure. Those things would be student achievement, performance on the state assessments that we have, growth and improvement on that, student growth measures, student improvement from year to year, things like graduation rate, things like the number and percent of students that are able to earn post-secondary credit while they're still in high school or earn an industry-recognized credential that prepares them for job performance when they graduate. To me, that's what I'm referring to when I say outcomes, as opposed to inputs or actions that you would take in schools, which would be variable across the school and depend on the needs of the school and the needs of the student in the school, which would be things like your instructional programs, your instructional strategies, whether or not you have a social worker in the school, whether that's a need or whether you need a nurse more or whether you need both, what you do with your community, how you work to engage your community. All those are very important. What teachers are doing to build relationships with the students in their classroom. You cannot, and I can say this as a teacher, you cannot effectively teach a classroom full of students, whether they're from a very high socioeconomic background with a lot of language development or a low socioeconomic background with very limited language development when they come in the door. And I've taught both, unless you work to build a relationship with those students. But those are not things that you can measure and report well as outcomes. They are essential inputs and things that go into the things that make education work and make it successful for our students. Does that answer your question?
And I'll take this moment to ask for final comments from our panel in any order that you want to jump in. Go ahead.
Thank you for having us here. I want to encourage the press and probably our own organizations to look at instances in the state where people are being successful. The state has an analysis. They call it beat the odds analysis. Those people who are getting extraordinary gains in spite of the challenges they face. I think there's a lot of good news stories out there, and we need to look at that. I want to encourage you to do that, and I want to encourage our organizations to make the press more aware of that, because I think in that, I think the strategies for turning around education lie in our communities and in our schools. I think they know best. The only other thing I'd say is I want to reiterate something that Martha Ann said about the difference in student achievement and student and academic progress. When I talk about student achievement, if you've got a 5th grade teacher that has a child transfer in that's reading on the 1st grade level, I think sometimes under our current analysis, when that child finishes 5th grade, if they're reading on the 3rd grade level, we'll say, my goodness, look how deficient that child is. I think we ought to be saying, my goodness, that child had 2 years of academic growth in 1 year. This is a success story. And I think so many of the students that we have transferring in and out of our schools, they come in way behind what the expectation for those students are. And we need to look at net gain scores of students to see how well those teachers are doing with a tough hand sometimes that they're dealt. Thank you all again for having us. This is a complex issue. I welcome your input or questions or whatever at any time. Thank you all for having us.
I'm going to use my chance to, I guess, underscore or remind you of some of the things I said already earlier. when we talk about struggling schools in the state of Georgia, remember, we're talking about 5% of schools. So the sky isn't falling as much as we make it seem. It's a Chicken Little. Is the sky really falling? Now balance that against what I said earlier. Even one child failing is one too many. These struggling schools need our urgent attention, and something must be done. But let's not forget that in very many other places, schools are succeeding with the clientele that they have in producing a product that we can at least rally around. Now, how do we support and how do we improve all of our schools, including the struggling ones, is about building the communities around the schools. See, it's easy to get a child to learn once they're ambitious. It's easy to get a child to learn once they're diligent. It's easy to get a child to learn once they believe that through education, I can really break this cycle and become what it is I think I want to be. Very many of the students that I meet are trapped in a cycle of feeling like, well, if I graduate, fine. If I don't, fine. Everybody in my neighborhood's doing fine and they're happy. Yeah, if we're honest enough to admit that, that exists in some places, in some pockets. Let's do the things that it takes to build up all of our communities to get kids coming to school wanting to learn.
I'm going to say what you said to begin with. They're going to think we compared notes, but we really didn't. I would say thank you for asking me to be here also, but re-emphasize what the senator said. There are a lot of positive stories out there. The list that was released this week of the chronically failing schools did have 153 schools on it. It was more than last year. But at the same time, we released a list of award schools that are among the highest performing in the states and showed the greatest gains, the greatest growth in students. And there were 231 schools on that list, more than last year. There are a lot of schools in this state that are having outstanding success with very challenging populations, similar to those in many of the struggling schools. And some of those schools are actually located in the same districts with struggling schools. So we know that it can be done. We know there's lots of positive work going on. And as we focus on what we see as the greatest problems going forward, let's look to a lot of those positive stories and models and see what we can learn from those and move to some of the areas where, to support some of those areas where struggle is going on. I think a lot of times we do tend to focus more on the negative, and I would challenge you and ask you to all focus equally on the positive. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panel, and I will say to all of the reporters out there, if you want a scoop and be connected with some of those high-achieving schools, I'm sure Martha Ann will help make sure that that happens so that you can write about them. So I will now turn it over to our president, Steve Dullinger.
How about a round of applause for our panel? Didn't they do a good job? I think through your questions and their conversation, we may have gotten a little bit of a peek into the crystal ball to see what might be coming up here in the legislative session. Just a couple little reminders before we let you scoot out of here. We ask you to complete the evaluation form. Bill takes those very seriously. As he talks to you during the year about what topics you want and what speakers you want, he also wants your feedback on this so we can make this even better for next year. Also, please use us as a resource. Again, call Bill, and he will track down Dana or me, or Dana and I have a lot of fun. We can tag team with some of you on conference calls. That's a lot of fun for us, but sometimes I think maybe informative for you. Bill will send you a message soon with a link to the video for today, so you can review this for other information, or your colleagues who aren't able to come today, that they can go online and see this also. And lastly, to remind you, for folks who may want a copy, of course, they can go online. It's on our website today. But anyone who wants one copy, we'll be glad to mail that to them. If they want additional copies, all we ask is that they pay for postage. So again, thank you.
Additional copies out here if anybody wants to.
Yeah, take some with you on your way out. A lot of stuff on the back table, particularly that House report we were talking about earlier. Thank you very much for coming and being brave and staying with us. And now drive safely on the way home. Thank you.